I want to show just the kind of structure of the Communist Party of China so people can understand why this party congress is important. This is the 20th party congress, like I said, every 5 years. So for 100 years now, the party has met to make 5-year plans. And this is the structure. And I want to give credit here to Dongsheng News. This is from a video that they did explaining the political structure of the Communist Party of China and the government of China. And if you see here, they have a pyramid. I think this is the best way of thinking about the structure of the CPC, the Communist Party of China. The National Party Congress, which is going on right now, it brings together 2,296 representatives, delegates they're called, from every single municipality and province and autonomous region from all over China. And they're elected. They're nominated and elected from their own local communities. So there's 2,296 delegates right now in Beijing meeting for the National Congress. Among them, they elect 360 members of the Central Committee. And then the 360 members of the Central Committee elect 25 members of the Politburo. And then the 25 members of the Politburo elect the Standing Committee of the Politburo. And Xi Jinping is expected to announce the new members of the Standing Committee on Sunday, which is October 23rd. So there's still a few more days going on of the Congress. And then, of course, the General Secretary of the party is the top individual who's the leader of the party. So that's a very basic overview. I just, for people who are watching, I wanted to provide a very basic overview of how the Communist Party of China is organized and how the party Congress works. So now I want to open this up. Carlos, I'll go to you. You've been following this very closely. Can you reflect on how important this party Congress is and why people around the world should keep their eyes on what's happening in Beijing?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's one of the fundamental parts of Chinese democracy, alongside the National People's Congresses and alongside the National People's Consultative Committees. And as you've said in the introduction, what's discussed at the moment is gonna set the tone for China's development in the coming 5 years, and to be honest, beyond that. I mean, the core theme that's really come out of this Congress so far, and the core theme that is repeated numerous times in Xi Jinping's speech, his opening speech, his work report to the Congress, is that we're putting the building blocks in place to make sure that we can meet our second centenary goal of building China into a modern socialist country in all respects, right? By the centenary of the founding of the PRC, that is, by the middle of the century, by 2049. And what he says, his quote from his speech, he says, "From this day forward, the central task of the Communist Party of China will be to lead the Chinese people of all ethnic groups in a concerted effort to realize the second centenary goal of building China into a great modern socialist country in all respects, and to advance the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation on all fronts through a Chinese path to modernization." So there's kind of a lot of meaning embedded in that, but I think it kind of encapsulates a huge amount of optimism, a huge amount of confidence, which reflects a parallel optimism and confidence in among the Chinese population as a whole. And because it's the 20th Congress of the CPC, I've found it very difficult to avoid kind of constantly in my head making a comparison with the 20th Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, which, as you guys all know, took place in 1956 and was a very kind of controversial sort of landmark moment in the history of 20th century communism, and sort of in many ways set in train a process, I think, of decaying confidence, what the Chinese would call historical nihilism, that contributed in a fairly meaningful way to the collapse of the Soviet Union a few decades later. And the CPC has quite obviously studied that process, the fall of the Soviet Union, very carefully, and is really serious about not making some of those mistakes, particularly with regard to like ideological matters and the maintenance of working class political power. Like on the economic side in China, I mean, reform has gone so much further. Chinese reform since 1978 has gone so much further, like orders of magnitude further than it ever went, than economic and market reform ever went in the Soviet Union, you know, in terms of the quantities of private capital, in terms of the quantities of foreign investment, in terms of, you know, having billionaires, having Starbucks all over the place, KFC, stock exchanges, engagement in global value chains, you name it. But what you very much haven't had in China, of which you did have in the Soviet Union, is political liberalization, by which I mean, you know, like, that's not a positive spin on political liberalization. That's liberalization, which means allowing the capitalist class to start dominating the Communist Party. It means giving the capitalist class space to start kind of mobilizing separately towards their own interests and start conspiring with the West to overthrow socialism, as happened in the Soviet Union. You know, Deng Xiaoping very famously laid out at the start of reform and opening up in 1978 what he called the 4 cardinal principles, as being kind of fundamental guards against counter-revolution. So those are: defend the socialist path, maintain working class rule, maintain the leadership of the party, adhere to Marxism, adhere to Leninism, adhere to Mao Zedong thought. And, you know, through a lot of twists and turns, the Chinese have stuck to that. And you can see just this incredible difference in the results. You know, by the 1980s, the CPSU was suffering, you know, a major identity crisis. The Soviet economy was stagnating and essentially a bit of a mess. Living standards were falling behind the West. They were embroiled in an unwinnable war in Afghanistan. Levels of confidence were very low, levels of optimism were very low, and levels of alienation were very high. And it's just contrast that with China in 2022, you know, 44 years after the launch of reform. It's a very different vibe. You know, the government popularity rating is consistently like 90 plus, 95 plus. Life expectancy in China has just surpassed that of the United States. It's now 78 point something %. Obviously, they've dealt with COVID extremely well. China's become, you know, the world leader in renewable energy. It's increasingly a world leader in science and technology and nanotechnology, AI, quantum computing, and so forth. And so there's this huge amount of confidence and optimism. Dealing with corruption is another thing that's really helped in that process of building confidence and building trust and developing sort of a sense of fairness. And again, the Xi's speech to the Congress really doubles down on this. He says, we've waged a battle against corruption on a scale unprecedented in our history. Driven by a strong sense of mission, we've resolved to, quote, offend a few thousand rather than fail 1.4 billion. And we've decided to clear our party of all its ills. And, you know, that's, you know, really strongly connected to the whole idea of making the system fairer, building common prosperity, making people's lives better, creating an overall environment characterized by fairness, justice, and the rule of law. So, you know, it's just really interesting to look at what's going on in the 20th National Congress of the CPC and to see how it reflects the CPC and the Chinese people's vision for, you know, how they see Chinese socialism developing over the coming decades.